To discuss an issue often asked by many people, what is the difference between Mahayana Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism? To understand this correctly, let's review the history of Buddhism and find the origins of Mahayana Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism. Buddha was born in the 6th century BC. He attained enlightenment at the age of 35, spent 45 years preaching Dharma to save people, and entered nirvana at the age of 80. He is certainly a person with the most energy, day and night preaching Dharma to teach living beings, and he only sleeps for 2 hours a day. The Buddha preached the Dharma to all classes: kings, princes, Brahmins, merchants, poor people, intellectuals, and common working people. His teachings meet every person's spiritual needs. What he preached is called Buddha's words. At that time there was no place called Theravada or Mahayana. After he established the order of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, the Buddha introduced precepts and dogmatic principles to protect the congregation called Vinaya. His teachings included in the sermons to monks, nuns and lay men and women are called Dhamma. The first Sutra Collection Conference, 3 months after the Buddha passed away, his great disciples convened a conference in Rajagaha city. Elder Kassapa, Sialetis, presided over this conference. There are 2 very important people in this congress. They are inclined towards 2 different fields. These 2 people proclaim the Dharma and Vinaya together. Mr. Ananda is the most important disciple. Being close to the Buddha for 25 years, he had a super memory and could reread what the Buddha preached, and Mr. Upali, recited all the precepts promulgated by the Buddha. In the first gathering congress, only 2 parts of Dharma and law were reproclaimed. Although there are no different views on the Dharma, no mention of Abhidhamma, there is only a few discussions of precepts. Before the Buddha passed away, he advised Venerable Ananda that if the Sangha wanted to change a few small precepts, they could change it. But at that time Ananda was too sad because the world-honored one was about to pass away, and for Ananda that was impossible, so he did not ask the master which precept was the small precept. The members of the conference did not agree on which precepts were minor. Finally, the elder Kassapa decided that none of the precepts given by the Blessed One needed to be changed, nor did he introduce any new precepts. So there is no legitimate reason to change the precepts. However, Elder Kassapa reminded one thing: if we change the precepts, public opinion will say that Samama Gautama's disciple changed the precepts before he was cremated. During the assembly, the teachings were divided into different parts and each part was assigned to an elder and his disciples to memorize. The teachings were then transmitted orally from teacher to disciple. The teachings are recited daily by congregations who regularly check with each other to ensure that there are no omissions or additions or subtractions. Historians recognize that oral tradition is more reliable than a report written by one person about an event that occurred many years later. The Second Conference on the Collection of Sutras. 100 years later, the Second Conference on the compilation of the sutras was held to discuss a number of precept issues. After 3 months of the Buddha's passing, there was no change in the precepts because during that time no economic, political and social changes took place. But 100 years later, some monks saw the need to change minor precepts. Orthodox monks say that no precepts need to be changed while others insist on changing a few precepts. Finally, a number of monks left the assembly and founded the Mahasangha. Even though it is called Mahasanghastra, it does not mean Mahayana. And in the Second Council, only issues related to the precepts were discussed and there was no discussion about the Dharma. The Third Conference on the Collection of Sutras. In the 3rd century BC, during the reign of Emperor Asoka, the Third Conference on the Collection of Scriptures was held to discuss different views between monks of the opposite sex. In this congress, the differences are no longer limited to precepts but are also related to the Dharma. At the end of the congress, the chairman, Moggalaputta Tissa, compiled a book called Points of Difference, Kathavathu, to refute the paranoid and erroneous theories of some sections. The Dharma agreed upon and approved by the Great Assembly is called Theravada doctrine. The Abhidharma Pitaka was compiled in this conference. After the Third Assembly of the Sutras, King Asoka's son, Mahinda, brought the Tripitaka to Sri Lanka along with the commentaries that were reproclaimed by the Third Assembly. The scriptures brought to Sri Lanka have been preserved until today without the loss of a single page. The scriptures were written in Pali, based on the Magadhi language preached by the Buddha. There was no such thing as Mahayana at that time. The emergence of Mahayana, between the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD, the two terms Mahayana and Hinayana appeared in the Lotus Sutra of Wonderful Dharma, Sad Dharma. Pundarika Sutra. Around the 2nd century AD. The word Mahayana gradually became more clearly defined. Nagarjuna promoted the Mahayana philosophy of emptiness, and in a small sutra called the Madhyamaka Karika, also known as Madhyamaka, demonstrated that all phenomena are empty. Are not. Around the 4th century, Asana and Vajabandhu composed a number of works on Mahayana scriptures. After the 1st century AD, the Mahayanas began to take a clear stance, and from there, they introduced the names Mahayana and Hinayana. We should not confuse Hinayana with Theravada because these nouns are not synonymous. Presbyterian Buddhism came to Sri Lanka in the 3rd century BC, when there was no word Mahayana at all. The Hinayana sect only developed in India and existed completely independently, not the form of Buddhism existing in Sri Lanka. Today, the Hinayana sect no longer exists anywhere in the world. Therefore, in 1950, the World Fellowship of Buddhists, WFB, inaugurated in Colombo, unanimously decided that the term Hinayana should be abolished because it had no connection with Buddhism. Present today in Sri Lanka, Thailand, Burma, Cambodia, Laos, etc. Above is a summary of the history of Theravada, Mahayana and Theravada Buddhism. Mahayana Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism. Now, let's try to find out what is the difference between Mahayana Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism. I have studied Mahayana Buddhism for many years, and the more I study it, the more I see that there is hardly any difference between Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism in terms of basic teachings. Both accepted Shakyamuni Buddha as their teacher. The Four Noble Truths in both schools are the same. The Noble Eightfold Path in both schools is similar. The theory of dependent origination in both schools is the same. Both do not accept the idea of God creating this world. Both accept the three characteristics, suffering, impermanence, anatta, and the three non-studies, precepts. Concentration, wisdom, without any difference. These are the most important teachings of the Buddha and are recognized by both schools. There are also a few differences. Obviously, the view of the Bodhisattva. Many people say that Mahayana is the Bodhisattva state leading to Buddhahood, while Theravada is the Bodhisattva state leading to Arhatship. I must say that the omniscient Buddha, Paksabuddha and Shravaka are also Arhats. Mahayana scriptures never use the Arhat vehicle. They use three terms: Bodhisattva vehicle, Pratyabuddha vehicle and Shravaka vehicle. According to the Theravada tradition, these three attainments are called the three attainments of enlightenment, Bodhi. Some people believe that Theravada Buddhism is selfish because it teaches people to seek personal salvation. But how can a selfish person become enlightened? Both schools accept there are three vehicles, or three enlightenments, and also recognize the Bodhisattva ideal as the noblest. However, Mahayana has fictionalized many mystical bodhisattvas. Meanwhile, Theravada Buddhism believes that the Bodhisattva is a human being in our midst, and he devoted his entire life to enlightenment, surely becoming a Buddha for the benefit of the world. For the sake of happiness. Happiness for life. There are three types of Buddhas: perfectly enlightened, Samasambuddha, solitary enlightened, Paksabuddha, and silently enlightened, Savakabuddha. The attainment of nirvana among the three is the same. The only difference is that the perfect enlightenment has more mighty virtues and qualities than the other two. Some people think that emptiness spoken by Mr. Long Mang is completely Mahayana teachings. In fact, he relied on the idea of anatta and dependent origination, already available in the Pali Canon. Venerable Ananda once asked the Buddha, people talk about the word emptiness, so what is emptiness? The Buddha replied, Ananda, there is no ego nor anything related to ego in the world. Therefore, the world is selfless. This idea was put forth by Venerable Long Mang when he wrote his famous book Madhyamaka Karika, Madhyamaka. In Mahayana Buddhism, besides the idea of emptiness, there is also the idea of stored consciousness, which has its origin in the original sutras. The Mahayana people only further developed these concepts to create profound philosophy and psychology.
Thank you for spending your valuable time on my channel journey to enlightenment. Wishing you a very peaceful and happy day. Don't forget to click like and subscribe to my support channel. See you in the next video.